So, I don't usually do this unless there's quite a bit of substance, but a lot of you have been asking my thoughts on this. So, what is that? I mean, I guess you've kind of read from the title, but today we are getting into some supposed leaked casting details for very, very interesting characters that are supposedly to be in the Penguin series. So obviously what I'm going to do is break them down, how reliable this could be, how possible it is as to whether or not they could be in the Batman universe or that of the Penguin show, and just overall as well dive into a little bit of what Matt Reeves has said before on this matter and how it could mean that we could very well see characters like this be introduced, because honestly, even leaked stuff aside, you guys know I love talking about this stuff, and what this gives me is a really good opportunity to talk about characters like this and their possible future appearances and adaptations within that of the Batman universe. Let's get into the source of this, like how did this actually all start? Let's backtrack a little bit. And I admit, as I said right at the beginning, things like this, when you first see it, you kind of usually roll your eyes at a little bit. So the reason why, first and foremost, people are giving this rumor a bit of interest initially is because it matches up with what was teased from an insider, if you will, who goes by the name of Batman on Film, in where on March 25th, he tweeted out a picture of the Golden Age Clayface, which obviously just kind of spells out like, hey, you know, I may know something about the Golden Age Clayface, you know, he could be coming to a Batman project soon. Then, lo and behold, these leaks of these casting calls, character descriptions, if you will, came out on 4chan. But the thing is, sometime after that tweet was made from said insider. Because as mentioned, that tweet was March 25th, hinting at some of that involvement of Clayface in the future, and this 4chan post was made on the 2nd of May. Now, before you mention it, I know 4chan, it's one of those really mixed bags where stuff fake all the time gets posted to 4chan, and then some stuff is posted there where it's like downright true. Like, it's like, for example, what we're about to get into with reading out these descriptions could 100% be copy and pasted off like a casting call sheet, and it's very accurate to what the casting director is looking for right now, as Penguin is very early in pre-production and doing all this stuff before it starts filming. So don't get me wrong, I am aware, and that's why I am preaching at the same time, heavy, heavy, heavy grain of salt. But then there's the other side of things. I don't really personally know anything about Batman on Film. That's not a dig or anything like that. I just genuinely don't really know anything about him. After doing some research, because I thought I'd look into like what people thought of Batman on Film, people say that their track record for things like this is supposedly solid. Others say there's been dips, but to be honest, that is kind of the case for insiders teasing things. Sometimes they may have heard something true and then it might change, but they tease it anyway. Sometimes they just get things wrong from a fake source. You know how this thing works, but that's not really me giving any credibility. It's just giving the benefit of the doubt of how sometimes even some things in a track record can be wrong. But for what it's worth, I've read more good things than negative things with regards to Batman on Film's track record. People tend to lean on him as more reliable than not, and for some fans who see the sequence of events with this Clayface from Batman on Film being teased quite some time before the leak, it gives it some credibility that, oh, then these 4chan descriptions then appeared. But again, take that as you will. I just wanted to give you the full picture of what we're dealing with here, and that is why you really, really need to take this with a huge grain of salt as to how it could totally not be true at the same time. But again, I still wanted to make this video because the larger character and characters that we're going to get into is A, something that could appear in this Penguin series regardless, more than one of these character descriptions, and then B, in that of the movies. So again, it's just a fun topic to dive into. And hey, what if it could be true? So let's get into the character descriptions, and this is where things get interesting. A spin-off of the Batman, we've kind of heard this description anyway, described as a Scarface-like series about the rise of Penguin's character. The Penguin, otherwise known as Oswald Chesterfield Cobblepot, is a dapper mob boss and one of Batman's primary villains. So first up, seeking Robert, series regular, handsome, charming, very physically fit, and incredibly ambitious gangster. Now, more on him in a little bit because, again, assuming this is true, some very, very interesting ideas as to who that could be and who could be popping up in this Penguin series, given that this is kind of about the rise to power in a power vacuum left behind in Gotham from that of Carmine Falcone's death. Now, next up, the most arguably interesting character, and this is Logan, series regular, and the details for this are fascinating. So, actor who was driven mad when he heard he couldn't participate in a play due to his deformed face. And that's going to be a large chunk of this video because of the larger subject matter of, could someone like Clayface work in the Batman world? And if you have doubts, or if you don't, believe it or not, there are a couple of different ways, depending on how you view Matt Reeves is really handling this universe, unwinding the more fantastical into that of a grounded, way of doing things. Now, Rupert, series regular, 50-60, wealthy socialite who is a cruel father and an abusive husband, and Linda, a series regular as well, and supportive but tired wife, reluctantly dealing with her abusive husband and his troubled son. Now, more on those two in a little bit. First of all, before we get into those other character descriptions, we need to talk about this Logan, the actor who was driven mad when he heard he couldn't participate in a play due to his deformed face. And we've discussed Clayface and if he could be in the Batman world, in this universe, if you will, in the Batman discussion series that we have running on the channel. If you aren't aware of that already, we usually do a weekly kind of episode of just a AMA, Q&A of anything about the movie, theories, anything relevant to recent news. It just continuously goes on. I do recommend checking it out. So let's break this down, get into the larger Reeves verse of this all. So in terms of could he fit into Matt Reeves' world, as he said himself, he feels drawn to finding the grounded version of everything, and that it would be a challenge in an interesting way to try and figure out how to make that happen with regards to just any fantastical aspect of the Batman lore. Matt Reeves even went on to say, and this is me kind of, slimming down the quote, that he loves the fantastical side of Batman, but this iteration, so his world, his iteration, his movies, his spin-off shows, all while being very comics faithful, this one doesn't lean as hard into the fantastical. However, to him, what would be interesting would be to try and unwind the fantastical to see, well, how could that make sense here? And I'm happy to report that whether you love this idea or dislike it, where we're about to go with Clayface, it can work both ways. Whether it was obviously extremely fantastical with the little blobby mudman kind of Clayface, or the very, very earlier, as teased with the Insider, if you will, Golden Age-esque Clayface, which is definitely more akin to this universe, but albeit they could inject some fantastical in there. So bear in mind that the names of these character descriptions, again, assuming these leaks are true, are likely maybe aliases. For example, Clayface's name is Basil, not Logan. Things can be changed for adaptations, but just to put it out there, casting character descriptions can indeed just be fake names. So the reason why this Golden Age, as teased with, if we line up the leaks from what we were going on earlier, the tease from the Insider, the 4chan leaks that came out some time after that, which, is interesting when you put both those bits of circumstantial evidence together, if you will. The reason why this Golden Age Clayface would work so well is more or less because of what I've aforementioned. Reeves is seeking a way to unwind the fantastical and say, how could that make sense? And trust me, the Golden Age Clayface here could really work, albeit with some fantastical elements in there as well, if they want to play with that. And I say fantastical still, and this is something I really want to get across, as I always tend to use this explanation when talking about Matt Reeves' universe. What is the fantastical aspect? What is the grounded aspect? Where do the two of them meet? And what is really being sought out in this world? And I feel like we have enough education on this now because we've had a whole ass 2-hour and 46-minute film about it. Granted, there wasn't mad fantastical aspects in there, but that in of itself is a little bit of a clue, albeit that Riddler isn't mad fantastical himself. But I still do feel like there's a clear vision here, especially when you combine that with what Matt Reeves has literally articulated himself on the subject matter of his universe with the subject matter of fantastical or not. So the explanation I tend to give when getting across how Matt Reeves, or I truly believe he's trying to construct this universe, is that he also tried to make the Planet of the Apes trilogy grounded within our reality. And what I mean by this is, like, obviously guys, there isn't a drug today that exists that you can inject apes with that basically evolves them up until the point of where they try and take over the country and planet Earth, and as those freaking Apes films did with Caesar, Andy Serkis' Caesar. Like, that isn't a realistic thing. It borders more onto the fantastical in terms of, hey, how do we tackle that? Like Matt Reeves said, we could tackle that in a realistic sense of maybe a drug that you can inject and it does this, that, and the other, and they, you know, get smarter, but it's still grounded in our world view. It's not like going to an actual literal planet of the apes like in that of the original Planet of the Apes. My main bottom line there is that I think we can all agree that Matt Reeves' The Planet of the Apes trilogy was still filmed and depicted in a way that could somewhat try and ground it in reality, right? So with the Batman movies and what Matt Reeves is doing, you wouldn't have a literal, like, again, some people might want to disagree with me on this. Fair enough, I'll hold my hands up if I am wrong. But in my opinion, you wouldn't have a fully formed, mud-blobbing Clayface like that of the very, very modernized version. But sure, you can still do Clayface. You could adapt Clayface that sees him in such a way of a makeup and prosthetics expert, like unmatched to that of anyone else in the world. Like, that's how skilled he is. And also walk the line of perhaps something that isn't entirely believable nor realistic in today's world, hence where the comparison of the Planet of the Apes comes in with the drug that's obviously not existing in our world today that advanced the apes. The same kind of thing. Ground it in our reality, do that with Clayface, but maybe give him some prosthetic that just kind of is a bit unrealistic, but yet it's still grounded in a world that is realistic. So you see where I'm going with this with Clayface. And again, to keep revisiting that of where this story all originates from, with the tease of that of the Golden Age Clayface picture, all of that comes back full circle in how it can work with what Matt Reeves has already set up with this film, the Riddler, the early version, or what if he was to do a Clayface? Well, hey, like, ancient Clayface going back decades and decades and decades is right up Matt Reeves' alley. So this Golden Age Clayface, now that I've finally shut up and got to it, he goes all the way back to 1940. So back in the Golden Age, Basil Karlo was indeed a B-list actor who was, as per a very similar description to the casting call, driven insane when he hears that a film that was being remade that he originally starred in would be shot without him, because he was also somewhat involved in it at the same time. And as a result, yeah, since he's driven insane, he kind of dons this Clayface costume, of which, ironically enough, was a villain he'd played in a previous role, like literally that same costume. And what he did is they began killing the actors in the order they die and the way they die in the film, of which that of the original Clayface killer character also killed them. But eventually, before I think he finishes the killing order and that of the way the Clayface killer did it in the movie, he is stopped by none other than Batman. Now, this is where things might make you come over to this way of thinking in Matt Reeves' world, and I know some people could be like, but no, it would be so cool if we actually had a blobby Clayface. Again, hold on some hope there with, as I said, try and stick with what I'm about to say, but then maybe add some aspect of fantastical putty or something like that with the prosthetics thing I was going over. So this Clayface in the Golden Age also wore a literal, as per the costume, a part of it was a literal mask of clay, of which, oh my god, I can really imagine the Matt Reeves horror vibe. Just remember Riddler behind the mayor in that scene before he, you know, goes at him. Imagine Clayface with a mask of clay. Yeah, I don't really need to say anymore. That would indeed be the most grounded approach to the character. So as you're getting the scope now, this Clayface would be perhaps, let's just say in Matt Reeves' universe or the Penguin series, that of like this master of disguise, like exceptionally so. Perhaps even using a very high-end prosthetics method and a clay-like product of perhaps his own making to eventually give him the moniker of Clayface, or just sticking with a simple clay mask and costume, with the motivation of wearing the mask of clay to hide his facial disfigurement. Now, the thing is, in having said that, the Clayface in the Golden Age, I believe, didn't even have a facial disfigurement. It really was as simple as going mad, killing the people in that previous role of the Clayface killer that he had played, and yet, lo and behold, in this casting call, assuming it's true for the sake of argument, sake of the video, if you will, it details the disfigurement. But again, assuming this leak is true, that doesn't really surprise me. Remember what I always say, adaptations aren't copy and paste, so albeit let's just assume this leak is true, let's just assume Matt Reeves does a pretty grounded take in where he has literally a mask of clay. And even though in the Golden Age version he didn't have a disfigurement, well, in this one maybe he wears that mask to also help hide it. Maybe in that of more of a Phantom of the Opera sense. And maybe after a car accident, his face was disfigured to give more of that motivation as to why he seeks to change his look and why he became so good at it and why certain people could utilize that ability. And as many of you know, in the various stories, he abused this industrial makeup which he applied to his face that was infused with clay and putty, and that, you know, somewhat warped his flesh into new shapes. Now, I don't necessarily think it would be done that way in Matt Reeves' universe, but more along the way of insane facial prosthetics. Like, you know how well they did Colin Farrell? Like, literally, from Colin to Oz Cobblepot? Well, Clayface will be that, but better. Like, that's what I'm trying to get you in the mind state. But the biggest question that you may be thinking at this point, well, that's all cool, said and done, like, with the way that Reeves could ground this character, but how the heck would he fit into the Penguin show? Now here, obviously, I don't know the script, I don't know the story. Let's say, again, Clayface's leak is true and he is in the show. There are like a few ways, I guess, they could utilize Clayface. Like, could Penguin use him to disguise Clayface to take someone out that he's up against? That just seems a bit too straightforward for me and maybe a bit far-fetched. The thing is, I think he's actually worked with the Penguin before in the New 52, in where he actually purchased that illegal substance known as Renu or Renu. I never know how to pronounce Clayface's traditional little clay putty substance, if you will. But he purchased that off the Penguin to change his appearance, and in return, he had to basically work for Penguin as one of his henchmen to use the ability to shift his face. So there definitely, no matter what, is a connection there between that of Penguin and Clayface. And ultimately, maybe it does come down to something like where Reeves wants to do a very, like, again, as with the Riddler, who had all of this concealment, the coat, the trench coat and stuff. This could be a very early version before he has even the moniker of Clayface, but then he gets known around Gotham because of this guy who can pull off prosthetics so well that he can infiltrate places, and after that reaches the Gotham Gazette and other places so many times, then he gets the name of Clayface, just like how the paper's named Batman Vengeance or this vigilante Batman. So here, it could just come down to Penguin knows a guy who in this universe has a way with this clay putty-like product and can utilize it in an unmatched prosthetics expert like way. But then an interesting aspect came to me, and with the idea of the thing is that some people with maybe what I'm saying out right now is that they would love this character and this idea as an actual villain for a whole ass Batman film within this trilogy, and could perhaps view the use of Clayface, even if a very early Clayface within the Penguin series, to not be utilized in the best way because they just see this as like a really good film. The thing is, my response to that, and it's a similar response, and I can't be confident on this, but it's a similar response with that of other serial killers, like that of, well, first we had Riddler, then let's just say it was Clayface, who was a killer just like in the Golden Age, Professor Pig, like you keep going on with that. Everyone recommending these villains for the second movie and the third movie, it just kind of makes me think, I'm not so sure if Reeves wants to do a carbon copy of like, oh, who's that killer? And again, I'm not saying the second movie and the third movie story would be like someone sending letters to the Batman again, like the first movie. No. But you know what I mean, in essence, like, who's the killer? Like, you know, it turns out to be Clayface. Again, that would be a great detective story with Robert Pattinson's Batman all over again. But are we really gonna go there again with, like, who's the killer? Even with, like, different twists and turns, I'm just not so confident. That's why, again, I know people are starting to hate it at this point. I'm not saying Mr. Freeze is going to be the second villain, but with something like Mr. Freeze, it could break that of, like, oh, who's the killer in the first film? Love the first film, love what they did with Riddler, love the, oh, who is the killer vibe. But the second movie, it could still utilize heavy detective elements. Oh, who's doing this? Why have they busted in this place? In an effort of like a Heart of Ice storyline where Mr. Freeze is trying to save his wife, but it's like, wait, there's this ice damage on the walls. Oh, what's going on here? But it's not like it's as procedural as who is this killer? And at least Batman maybe gets to fight him out in the open a few more times. But if you did a serial killer thing like Clayface again or something like that in a movie, you get where I'm going with this at that point. It would just be a bit too similar in my opinion. But seriously, I do want to argue again, like, who knows? Every single time he could genuinely be going for constantly each and every film for the Batman 1, 2, and 3 to be a detective through and through story each and every time. And it doesn't really matter. He's just going to do it that way. Oh, look, Riddler was a killer, but who got put away in Arkham before that, in the year before? And who said it was almost our first anniversary? Joker. And he is referred to as a killer, but from Matt Reeves as well. So maybe there is a pattern here. But I just have a little bit of doubt, and I do think he will choose a villain who isn't as mystery-oriented, maybe, in the second film. So in conclusion, guys, because I've been going on about Clayface forever, but arguably one of the most interesting parts of this video, and this leak, if you will, that is how he could indeed be done within this show and universe. And when I say started off, I don't mean to say that started off to see him again in a future movie, but more of that of like Barry Keoghan's Joker. Let's just say we didn't see him again in any of the movies, even though I think we probably will. We might see Clayface in this Penguin series to know that he's out there, and in our headcanon, he will be out there one day as Robert Pattinson goes on to fight crimes, but they're in movies we'll never get to see. It could be that kind of situation. We might just see him in the Penguin series, and he doesn't come back as a main villain or anything like that in the second or third movie. Could come back as a side character, but if he is indeed in the Penguin series, just don't assume that he's going to be a big villain in the movies. Now, moving on, and this is kind of short but brief because I don't have as much to ramble about with regards to these other characters in the descriptions. But before we get to the second most interesting one, let's start off with some are saying that Rupert, the wealthy socialite who is a cruel father and abusive husband, could be Rupert Thorne. And Rupert Thorne, as many of you may know, is somewhat of like a corrupt politician, if you will, within that of Gotham, kind of mirroring a few of the characters in the first movie, who dabbles in some organized crime, and he would most certainly fit in well with the Penguin series, as Penguin's rise to power isn't only in the Gotham underworld, in the vacuum of power that Carmine Falcone left behind, but as we know, Oz likes to have his fingers dipped in political parts of Gotham as well, even sometimes getting up to mayor. And Rupert Thorne is often seen as one of Gotham's top crime bosses at times as well. So with the supported but tired wife reluctantly dealing with her abusive husband and his troubled son, likely, I guess, being the wife of, you know, the abusive husband, because his description was a wealthy socialite who is a cruel father and an abusive husband. So two series regulars there, that would be two characters who are linked. However, the son, that makes things interesting, because what if it isn't Rupert Thorne? Like, who could this son be? Maybe he's just the son of Rupert Thorne. It's as simple as that. But this might not even be Rupert Thorne, and I do want to mention what I said earlier. Hey, but these names could be fake names, so why would it be Rupert? Exactly. So that's where a lot of these things are up in the air. But if you have any other ideas about Rupert and the wife, Linda, let me know down in the comments below. But to save the second best for last, I guess you could say, we have something that I've been saying could be involved in the Penguin series ever since it got announced, ever since the end of the Batman movie, where, like, Batman was commentating saying the National Guard are coming in. And obviously that idea came out of what many people are thinking. In the vacuum of power, you're going to have other rivals who are also seeking that power. And how perfect would it be for that power-hungry rival of Oswald Cobblepot's to be Black Mask? That would be amazing. The character description is a series regular for that of a 30 to 45 aged actor, handsome, charming, very physically fit, and an incredibly ambitious gangster. Now, that doesn't mean, like, that literally doesn't mean Black Mask, but again, Black Mask, like, who knows if he's had any kind of, depends on the iteration of the character, whether he's using an ebony mask from that of the casket of his parents, if you will, to put on his face, whether there's an accident that molds it onto his face, whether that hasn't even happened yet because he's described as very handsome. Maybe there's something Penguin does that births the Black Mask character in this. Like, think about how warfare-y, like, this Gotham is. It's almost like a no man's situation at the end of the Batman, because not only the floods, but Falcone's dead. Like, this is everyone, the top dogs, including Oz, is seeking power. So I feel like, you know, Black Mask, Roman Sionis, would be a really cool early villain, someone who doesn't die. He's a villain, ironically enough, for a villain, that of Penguin in the Penguin series, but it sets up a character, again, who obviously isn't going to die. Yes, I'm looking at you, Birds of Prey, but obviously the reason why, first and foremost, he wouldn't die because he has years and years and years of story to go with that of Batman himself, but it'd be pretty neat if they somehow mesh that into maybe the way he got some of his ruthless anger and entitlement and just his gang persona of the Black Mask was that of his bid for power and rivalry up against that of Oswald Cobblepot. And even though maybe Oz doesn't kill him, maybe it ends with him giving him some territory in Gotham. Like, who knows there? Like, it's impossible to predict. But I think it's a big character for sure. Maybe some people would be like, nah, you can't do a Penguin show with another big-ass character like Black Mask. But I think you could. With Black Mask, I just feel like I don't need to go in as ham because he's not exactly fantastical, whereas Clayface was a big portion of this video because there's like a couple of different versions of Clayface that we needed to kind of rule out or maybe dissect as to what they could do with him. Black Mask straight up is Black Mask. Like, doesn't really matter which origin you go for it, he can still work in a Penguin and the Batman universe, or any spin-off show for that matter. So that is the end of my rambles today, guys, and that was a long video, but I have such a passion for this stuff, especially when it comes to just anything brand new, and even though these leaks could literally be 50-50, I still wanted to take that opportunity to talk about these characters because a lot of people ask me about Clayface, a lot of people ask me about the fantastical characters of the Batman's Rogues Gallery, and this was a goldmine opportunity to get into that discussion. So let me know what you think. It doesn't even really matter if you think the leaks are true or not. Let me know what you honestly think, first and foremost, of if you think Clayface can work in this world, and most importantly, with that in mind, which version of him? Do you agree with me that, akin to my Planet of the Apes analogy, if you will, and comparison, Matt Reeves will be going for more of the Golden Age version rather than that of the metahuman blob of clay, but that doesn't discount some kind of fantastical aspects. Again, I reference the analogy of the Planet of the Apes drug, something to that of the Renew kind of substance that he puts on his face, or that of a master prosthetics expert. I really do think that is the nail on the head there if Reeves was ever to do that character. And let me know if you think this leak is real anyway. How do you think that Clayface could be used? Do you think that connection to that of the source material with Penguin could maybe work? Maybe Penguin supplies him stuff. Maybe he just knows a guy who could be very useful. Like the video, I would really appreciate that. Share this with your Batman friends and fans out there. Do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Double check if you aren't subscribed because a lot of you tell me that you aren't. You're like, holy crap, I've been watching you for ages, but YouTube's been recommending me you, which is why I thought I was subscribed, but I wasn't. So check that red button. Follow me on Twitter. Links, as always, are in the description down below. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you, Bat Family, in the next video. Goodbye.